this afternoon. As you heard, we are recording. I know lots of folks like to perhaps listen to this later or want to share it with a colleague later. So we are thrilled to have you here. I am Kathy Hastings, Director of Outreach and Communications, and I am joined today with my colleague, Jenny Johnson, who is just getting her audio set up right now. But we are thrilled for those of you who are maybe either new to guiding students in financial aid and FAFSA, and or maybe you've been a counselor for a while, but new to that role. We're just going to give you an overview today. So hopefully by the end of the hour, you'll feel a little bit more comfortable with both. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny Johnson. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, thank you for the introduction, Kathy. I appreciate it. Forgive me, y'all, for my tardiness. I was having all of the computer trouble just a minute ago. I had to restart, but it doesn't matter. I'm here. Let's roll, okay? So I'm going to switch over to sharing my screen. It's the same presentation. So as Kathy mentioned today, this is a financial aid overview, FAFSA 101. It's meant to be an introductory lesson about financial aid and FAFSA. It's not in depth, but I'm hoping that, or our hope is that it'll get you started if you're new to this financial aid and this FAFSA world. So here's the plan for today. We are going to start by discussing the different types of financial aid that are available. We'll talk about what the FAFSA is, and then how you can help students and family fill out the FAFSA. And then lastly, we'll talk about some best practices and some resources. So we'd like to know who we have in the room today. So if you would, pull out your smartphone, scan the QR code, and tell us what's your level of comfort with the financial aid, and with the FAFSA. Let us know who we have here, and we'd love to hear from you during this first session of the presentation. Okay, nice. I love the quick response. And I love to watch the rates change as more people chime in. All right. Okay, interesting to see we don't have anybody all the way at the left end of the scale who's like completely weary, knows nothing about the aid process. Seems like most of you are somewhere in the middle. Maybe you know a little bit, could know more. Okay, we got some heart eye emojis. So based on the scores of those who submitted the responses, most of you are right around somewhere in the middle. So I'm hoping that this is gonna either boost the knowledge that you already have for those of you who are in the middle, or for those of you who just are not comfortable at all, that you're gonna walk away feeling a little more comfortable, a little more empowered to be able to talk about the financial aid process. So when we think about the types of students and families who are attending higher education, at least from the pay side, we have three types of students and families. So first, self-funders. So these are the families that either make too much money to qualify for need-based aid or don't want a government handout. We have those who are in high socioeconomic need background. So they will qualify for the most need-based aid that's out there. And then we have the forgotten middle. So they make too much money for most need-based aid, but don't earn enough to completely be able to fund their education or their students' education. And so while you would never ask a family which one of these categories they fall into, it's a good thing to keep this in the back of your mind as you're talking to families and as you're talking with students of yours, and how they might fall into these categories, and then how you might need to frame your messaging to fit these families' needs. So there are three main ways to pay for college. And boy, I tell you, technology really is just showing herself today, because that is not what the slide looks like, but we're going to go with it anyway. So there are three main ways to pay for college. There are family funds. There's financial aid, which is at the federal, state, and college level. And then there are gap funds. So that's money that is used to close the gap between the total cost of attending a college and the financial aid and family funds that a student may have access to. Oh, look at that. Isn't that pretty? So today we're going to talk about a few different types of aid. We're going to talk specifically about federal aid. We're going to talk about state aid, and then we're also going to talk about college aid. Those are the types of financial aid that we'll talk about today, okay? So when we move into talking about federal financial aid, the main way to apply for federal financial aid is through the FAFSA. And there are three main types of aid that a student can be eligible for based on their FAFSA. So grants, the main grant being the Pell Grant. The Pell Grant does not need to be repaid. It is considered gift aid, okay? Work study, which is allows a student to earn while they learn. So when a student is in college and is eligible for work study, they will go to the office, different offices on their campus to sign up for a work study position, maybe even interview for a job. They'll be able to earn a paycheck. And they decide what they want to do with that money while they are enrolled. And they're usually paid every 2 weeks or so. So when I was in undergrad and I had a work study job my first 2 years, I was an office assistant in a technology office, and I used the money to put gas in my car. I used it to get my hair done. And also I used it to go out to eat with my friends. So it was just like having a job that the students might have had in high school, except they're able to earn while they learn and work on campus. And then lastly, students are also able to access federal student loans through the FAFSA. So as we all know, loans do need to be repaid, but submitting the FAFSA does not obligate students to accept any of the loans that they are offered. I think that's a really important thing to share with students. There are a few other types of federal financial aid available, and they are not accessed necessarily through the FAFSA. So that's the Educational Training Voucher, the GI Bill, tax credits, and the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. We won't talk about all of the details of these sources of aid today, but we will talk about two specifically, the Educational Training Voucher and the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. So the Education Training Voucher for foster youth was designed to help students who are currently or formerly experiencing foster care help pay for college or for career school. So grants are available, up to $5,000 a year, up to 5 years, or until a student turns 26 years old. Students have to complete a FAFSA in order to be eligible, but the FAFSA is not their application for an ETV. Instead, they would get more information at ncreach.org. This money, this $5,000, up to $5,000 per year, can be combined with other grants and scholarships. And as I mentioned earlier, students would need to complete a FAFSA in order to be eligible, and they have to be 18 to apply. Funding is limited for ETVs, and it's distributed on a first come, first served basis. So if you have students that you know may be eligible for this, check out ncreach.org to educate yourself on what options could be out there for them. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act provides funds for education for in-demand jobs. Excuse me. This is focused on adult learners looking to reskill, and also it's open to out of school youth. If a student wants to find out if they qualify, they can contact their local career center through ncworks.gov. In addition to seeing if they qualify for education and training support under WIOA, which is what we call it, they also need to consider other services that they might qualify for as well. So career centers might offer support around creating a resume, job interview skills, or even providing help with job searches and other career guidance and assessment tools. So the WIOA is a really, really interesting tool that I really only learned about recently. So check out ncworks.gov to find out more information about WIOA. So we talked about the sources of federal financial aid, and we'll move into now talking about sources of state aid. So there are several ways to think about state aid. I've listed them here on the screen, and we're going to get into talking about a few of these opportunities. A lot of people don't think about in-state tuition as a form of state aid. But when you think about it, you can qualify for in-state tuition to attend a public college or university. And the average in-state savings for attending an in-state institution is almost $17,000. So that's really a perspective shift to think about in-state versus out-of-state tuition costs as a form of state aid. So you have to qualify for in-state tuition based on your legal residency in the state of North Carolina. So it's a perk to be able to attend an in-state institution at a lesser cost. So this is a type of aid. It's just done on the front end instead of on the back end to help reduce the cost of college up front. A recent College Board report found, again, that on average, students will receive or save nearly $17,000 by selecting an in-state university. And so those are real numbers. I mean, $17,000 is nothing to shake a stick at. So when you're having a conversation with students and families about ways to save money, consider staying in state, going local. Students will need to qualify, as a legal resident of North Carolina, and the application method to do that is through the Residency Determination Service, and you can see the link to access that application there on the screen. Another way to save on college costs, so again, an upfront method to save on college costs is for students to earn some credit while they're in high school at no cost to them. So advanced placement courses, IB courses, dual enrollment, Cambridge, those are all opportunities for students to be able to earn some college credit that they can take with them, which could reduce the amount of time that they have to spend at the institution, again, which could save them money. One thing to consider, though, is not all colleges accept early college credit. So students will need to check with their admissions office to find out whether that credit can be transferred to the institution. Again, we're talking about ways up front, things that students and families can do up front to manage the cost of obtaining a higher education. And one of those methods is the North Carolina Promise Tuition Plan. So through this plan, there are 4 universities or 4 institutions within the UNC system where tuition for each semester is at $500, and out-of-state tuition is at $2,500 per semester. So only $500 per semester at Western Carolina University, Fayetteville State University, Elizabeth City State University, and UNC Pembroke. That equates to savings of at least $10,000 over 4 years of attendance, which is, again, that's nothing to shake a stick at either. One thing to note, in addition to tuition, there are still fees and other costs of attendance. So we're only talking about in-state tuition, not the fees associated with attending the institution or the cost of attendance. But still, $500 per semester is a huge savings for students and families. There are some state grant programs that are available that students can look to tap into and families can look to tap into on the back end. So after families and students have reduced the cost of college up front by participating in one or more of the programs that we just talked about, need-based grants are available depending on whether you're going to a North Carolina public community college or university or one of the private colleges in North Carolina. Students will need to complete a FAFSA to be considered for these programs, and funding is available until it's exhausted. Students will need to complete the RDS process, which we outlined a couple of slides earlier, and be deemed as legal North Carolina residents. They'll need to be undergraduate students, again, at the community college or 4-year college level with no prior bachelor's degree. And they'll need to be able to make satisfactory academic progress. Which is really important for state financial aid, federal financial aid, and institutional aid. So is the student making satisfactory academic progress toward completing their degree. And each college will outline exactly what STAT looks like on their campus. But it's not something that students think about often before they're in a position where they're not making STAT and their financial aid is being threatened. So as you're talking with students and families, continue or remind them that they'll need to be able to make STAT if they're going to keep their federal, state, or institutional financial aid. And then lastly, these need-based grants are based on need, so they'll need to meet Pell eligibility criteria in order to be eligible for those state grant programs. All right, so we've talked a lot at length about state aid. Now let's talk about college-based financial aid. Or you might hear me call it institutional-based aid. And of course, as I'm talking to you all, they're coming to dump the trash and the dumpster out. So I apologize if you hear a loud banging outside. So according to the College Board, colleges and universities themselves are the largest source of financial aid today. So if we look at this map with all, or this graph with all of the different colors and the different bars within the bar graph, the dark blue section of the bar chart shows what part of financial aid comes from the institutions of higher education. And as the use of loans has shrunken over the past 10 years, so that is the dark gray section of the bar graph, you can see that the institutional grants, which have come from the university, have grown. They're working to meet, to close the gap between what was federal loan funding and what students need. So for families who don't think that they'll qualify for aid like Pell Grants, they should still complete a FAFSA, because most colleges and universities will use the FAFSA to determine if a student will qualify for aid at the institution itself. So the FAFSA isn't only for awarding federal aid, but it also can be used as a tool to award institutional aid. So there are different types of college-based financial aid. Scholarships and grants can be merit-based, meaning that they can be based on a student's academics or based on a talent like athletics or drama or music. Merit-based doesn't only have to mean academic. It's any talent-based scholarship where need isn't considered. And then scholarships and grants at the university can also be considered need-based, so based on whether a student needs the money to be able to attend the institution. Need-based scholarships, as I mentioned earlier, are often awarded based on a student's FAFSA or their CSS profile, which is an additional financial aid application that is required at some institutions throughout the country. In North Carolina, there are 5 institutions that require the CSS profile. They are Duke, Davidson, Elon, Wake Forest, and UNC Chapel Hill. So those 5 North Carolina institutions will use the CSS profile in addition to the FAFSA to award need-based financial aid, need-based institutional financial aid. Again, those are Duke, Davidson, Elon, Wake Forest, and UNC Chapel Hill. Another type of college-based financial aid is alumni-based scholarships. So many alumni will give money to the university, and they have stipulations that students have to meet to be eligible for those scholarships. They might be set up for students who are from the same county that the donor grew up in, or studying the major maybe that they studied or that they were interested in while they were in college. When thinking about college-based financial aid and how to access it, there are a few things to consider. Students should ask, and you can ask for this, or you can ask for yourself, how is a student considered for merit-based scholarships? Are they considered based on their admissions application, or is there a separate process for applying for merit-based scholarships? If the student's admissions application is the method of application, what's the deadline? Does the student need to apply by the early action deadline to be considered? If they apply at the regular decision deadline, will their application still be considered for merit-based scholarships? Some colleges only open their scholarship application portal to students once they've been submitted, once they have submitted their intent to enroll around May 1st. So the question there is, must the student be committed to attend the university before applying to scholarships at that institution? Those are questions that we can ask to increase our knowledge, to arm ourselves, but they're also questions that students should ask before the college application starts and also during the application process. Moving on from institutional financial aid, there are community scholarships available as well, and this falls into that gap funding that we talked about earlier. So these are sources that come from other sources other than federal aid and college aid and state aid, and outside of family funding as well. We are huge proponents of local scholarships over at SEAA, and so local scholarships typically have smaller applicant pools, increasing the likelihood of a student being selected to receive that scholarship. And so we are huge proponents, again, of local scholarships. So we really heavily endorse the cfnc.org/scholarships scholarship portal, where students can find over 100 local scholarships that can be filtered by county, that can be filtered by whether they're attending, the type of institution they're attending, 2-year or 4-year, public or private. It's a wonderful tool that students can use to access those local scholarships. We also strongly endorse the North Carolina Community Foundation scholarship portal. You can just Google North Carolina Community Foundation. It has nearly 150 scholarships offered. And again, there are local scholarships. Many communities want to see their students succeed. And so they're putting their money where their mouth is, and they're offering up scholarships that students can apply for to help manage the cost of attending college. Community and civic organizations. So think like your Rotary clubs, fraternities and sororities. They often have scholarships that are available to the local students in their community. And those scholarships are typically accessed through the school counselor's office, through you all's office. Local chapters of professional associations as well. So if a student knows that they're interested in being an engineer, maybe they're an African-American student, they can look for the local chapter of the National Society of Black Engineers to see what scholarships are available for students here in North Carolina. Maybe they want to go into marketing or HR, and they look into the professional associations aligned with those careers to see if they offer scholarships. And then finally, many local communities have an educational foundation that provides support for public schools and for students in their area and offer some scholarship assistance. So the Winston-Salem Foundation, the Guilford or Greensboro Community Foundation, those are all options for students. They can just simply Google it, and it'll come up on the screen, and they can, much like the North Carolina Community Foundation, search through their portal and their database of scholarships. Other gap funding can include employer education assistance programs. So employer education assistance has become one of the top benefits that employees look for when considering a job change. Many employers offer education assistance programs as a way to attract and retain employees. In fact, 56% of employees offer some type of education assistance benefit. Tuition reimbursements are the most common benefit, and that's when an employee pays upfront for their tuition, and then they're reimbursed by the employer upon completion of the course. Some might require achieving a certain grade, like an A or a B, in order to be reimbursed, or that you commit to staying at the organization for a specific time period. If you leave before then you would need to pay the balance of the education benefit back. Tuition assistance, which some employers are now starting to offer, knowing that many employees struggle to come up with the funds to pay for tuition up front. So rather than getting reimbursed, the employer would pay the tuition when you enroll in the course. They pay it directly to the institution. Sometimes these are limited to a small number of institutions that the employer has developed a relationship with, such as Starbucks. They're covering the cost of tuition at Arizona State University programs. Student loan repayment assistance is also huge, especially as we talked about, student loans earlier. About 8% of employers now offer this benefit, particularly to attract younger workers who favor the benefit over 401k retirement plans. And then also 529 college savings plan payroll deductions are being offered through employers now as well. So they allow you to have funds transferred directly from your paycheck into the savings account plan. And about 10% of employers offer this benefit. All right, we talked about financial aid basics. We talked about the different types of aid and the sources. So let's talk about the FAFSA. I have another poll for you all to complete. Tell me, have you ever walked a student through the FAFSA completion process? Again, this is just a temperature gauge to get an idea of who's in the room with us today. So scan the code and let us know. Ooh, okay. All right. So while you all are answering this question, I love all things financial aid. A lot of people think I'm weird because I don't get kind of grossed out by the FAFSA. I love the FAFSA, all things financial aid, and I'm all about helping people with the FAFSA. So the 60% of you have never done a FAFSA before, you're in the right place. So as we move forward, I just want to say we're talking about the FAFSA, but again, this is a high-level overview of the FAFSA. We're going to have some other workshops coming up, especially at the end of this month, that'll really help you with line by line how you get into the FAFSA. So for now, we'll just talk about how you're going to fill out the new FAFSA. The first thing to know is that even before we talk about FSA IDs, students who are high school seniors now, who are looking to fill out the FAFSA for their first year of college, are going to fill out the 2024-2025 FAFSA. So even though we are in school year 23-24, they are filling it out for the next year for when they actually need the money. So it's the 2024-2025 FAFSA. The FAFSA ordinarily opens on October 1st, but because there have been some upgrades to this year's FAFSA, it has not opened yet. We are told that it will open by December 31st, though we don't have a definite date to share with you all today. But when we do have that definite date, we will share it with you through every medium that we have. Okay, listservs, our website, ncfafsahub.org, CFNC, I'm sure is going to have it on social media. So every way that we have to contact y'all, you will know about the FAFSA date when it opens. So the first thing to know, or the second thing, I guess, to know about submitting a FAFSA is that your key to accessing the FAFSA is creating a federal student aid ID, also known as an FSA ID. So everyone who is inputting information on the FAFSA, whether it's a student or a parent, has to have an FSA ID. And each person has to have a unique email address to create an FSA ID. One email address per FSA ID, so no doubling up. When creating the FSA ID, it's important that students set up what's called two-factor authentication. I'm going to move ahead to that. Because for the 24-25 FAFSA, everyone who attempts to sign into the FAFSA will need to go through a multi-factor authentication process. So when students are setting up their FSA ID and when parents are setting up their FSA ID, we encourage them to verify or authenticate their email address, their phone number, and to also use an authenticator app so that when the time comes for them to log into the FAFSA, they can choose any two-factor authentication method that they want and be able to move through the process. So again, students and parents will need to have an FSA ID, and that FSA ID will be used to match a parent account to their student's FAFSA, which we'll get into a little bit more in just a moment. On the website that I just mentioned, ncfafsahub.org, there is an FSA ID worksheet available that you can use with students. It walks them through the steps of creating an FSA ID and also gives them a place where they can safely house their FSA ID username and password. So because this is based on their social security number and their identity is tied to it, they shouldn't share their FSA ID with anyone. And they also shouldn't leave it lying around anywhere because, again, it can be used to access some pretty sensitive information. All right, so we talked about everyone needs to have an FSA ID, but who are the people who need to have an FSA ID? The way that the FAFSA works is that a student will input their financial information, some demographic information, and also educational information on the FAFSA, but at least one parent has to do so as well. So parents' tax information is needed to fill out the FAFSA. Whose tax information is determined by something called a parent wizard that will help a student walk through the process and figure out whose information needs to go on the FAFSA. So if a student's legal parents are married and they file their taxes jointly, only one parent has to obtain an FSA ID. And both parents' tax information will go on the FAFSA because they filed together and the student's parent and they're married. If the student's legal parents are not married and they do live together, both parents will have to get an FSA ID and both parents' tax information will go on the FAFSA. So again, if their legal parents are married and filed jointly, only one parent has to get an FSA ID and both of their tax information will go on the FAFSA. If the legal parents are not married, but they live together, both parents will have to get an FSA ID and both parents' tax information will go on the FAFSA. If a student's legal parents are not married and they don't live together, then the parent wizard is going to walk them through the process of figuring out which one of their parents is going to need an FSA ID and whose tax information is going to go on the FAFSA. This isn't based on who files the student on their taxes. Rather, the parent who provides the most financial support for the student is the one whose tax information is supposed to go on the FAFSA. So again, it's not based on who files the student on their taxes. It's based on who provides the most financial support for that student. So again, there's a new parent wizard within the FAFSA that will help the student know which of their parents is going to need to contribute their tax information to the FAFSA. And FSA is also updating the Who's Your Parent infographic. When they update that, we will share it with you all. I'm sure we'll have it on ncfafsahub.org so that you can use that infographic to help students and families figure out who has to contribute to that student's FAFSA. There's a new term that's being used with this new FAFSA, and it's called contributors. So even though I've used the term parent and I've used the term student, they're actually called contributors. Every person who provides information on the FAFSA is known as a contributor. And each contributor, as I mentioned, will need their own FSA ID to access and to submit their portion of the FAFSA. So the way that FSA has designed the FAFSA to work is that a student has their portion of the FAFSA, the parent contributor has their portion of the FAFSA, and those two portions or those two contributors are not supposed to see the other contributor's portion of the FAFSA. So student Jackie would log into the FAFSA using her FSA ID and password. And that student would walk through filling out the information that is pertinent to them. There's a series of questions that they would have to ask about themselves, about their demographics, about their plans for school, what colleges they want to send their FAFSA to. And then the student would need the parent's first and last name, date of birth, email address, and social security number. And that student would then invite their parents to contribute to their FAFSA. So Jackie would go through and submit their portion of the FAFSA. And Jackie would come to a screen that looks like what you see before you. And it would say, your section of the FAFSA is complete. Your parent is going to need to contribute to the FAFSA. And then Jackie would see the name of the parent that she has invited to contribute to the FAFSA, the date that that request was sent to the parent, and then the status, whether or not the parent has received the invitation, has checked or has logged in, has submitted their portion of the FAFSA. So Jackie has done her part, and now Jackie is waiting on her parent to finish their part as a contributor. Even though that's the most ideal way, it's also possible for the parent to start the process and to invite the student. So if the student begins the FAFSA themselves, then they only see their portion. They do not see the parent's portion of the FAFSA. However, if the parent starts the process, the parent can see the student's portion of the FAFSA and their own portion as well. In order for a student's FAFSA to be considered, students, or every contributor, students and parents, have to consent to having their federal tax information imported from the IRS in a process called the direct data exchange. The way that it should work is that students and parents approve the direct data exchange from the IRS to the FAFSA, and they're able to move forward with the application. They don't have to manually input their tax information. Instead, it'll be transferred directly from the IRS. The thing to know that is if a student or their contributor does not approve or consent having their federal tax information transferred from the IRS or imported from the IRS, the student's FAFSA will not be considered for financial aid. So if you remember nothing else that we talk about today, remember that all contributors to the student's FAFSA must consent to having their federal tax information imported from the IRS. Students, parents, if the step parent has to submit information, everybody has to consent to having their tax information imported from the IRS. If they don't, the student's FAFSA will not be considered for financial aid. And there isn't a workaround for this. Even if they decide to submit a paper copy of the FAFSA, submitting a paper copy implies consent. So even then, they will have their federal tax information imported or shared from the IRS. If a student or their parent contributor decides at that moment that they don't want to offer or give consent, they will be able to manually input federal tax information, but they still won't be considered for financial aid. If they go through the process, submit the FAFSA without that consent, and then later change their minds, they will be allowed to go back into the FAFSA and to make a correction and to give that consent. And then at that point, the student's FAFSA will be considered for financial aid. So again, y'all, this is just high level information. The nitty gritty steps about the FAFSA, we aren't doing those steps today. We'll be doing those on at the end of the month. I'll give you the information about that session. So this is just high level, okay? After the student submits the FAFSA, they get what's called the FAFSA submission summary, okay? The FAFSA submission summary is going to show a few things. So first, it's going to show their estimated federal aid. So whether they are eligible for a Pell Grant, whether they're eligible for a work study, whether they're eligible for federal student loans. And it's also going to give them a number called the Student Aid Index. So for those of you who have submitted a FAFSA in the past or have walked a student through the process, you'll know that at the end of the FAFSA, there was a number called the EFC, or expected family contribution. Well, that term is out and student aid index is in. So the student aid index is just what it says. It's a number, it's an index that colleges will use to determine whether or not or how much a student is eligible for in financial aid. It's going to be used to determine their financial need. So once they submit the FAFSA and they get their FAFSA submission summary, they will see their student aid index. They'll be able to see their estimated federal aid, and they'll also be able to click a tab at the top to show them the answers that they input on their actual FAFSA. The school information tab of the FAFSA submission summary will give the graduation rates and some other really important percentages for every college that they submit or that they sent their FAFSA to. Students can send their FAFSA to up to 20 colleges at one time here on this new version of the FAFSA. So that's a change from 10 colleges before. So under school information tab, for each one of those colleges, students will see the graduation rate for that school, the retention rate, so how many students are coming back from the first year to the second year, the transfer rate, what percentage of students are transferring out. They can also see the default rate, so what percentage of students are defaulting on their student loans. These are huge tools that students and families can use to make the best decisions for them. And then there's this next steps tab as well that students will have highlighted with a red exclamation point if there are some steps that the student needs to take in order to make sure that their FAFSA goes from submitted to completion. So if a student has been selected for verification, if there's any follow-up documentation needed, or if the student's parent contributor hasn't done their part yet, then their FAFSA will go directly to this next step screen and there'll be a red exclamation point there. So some best practices for FAFSA completion. Where possible, work with students and parents together. And if you can't do that, then consider starting with the parent. We mentioned earlier, encourage students to accept all of the methods to authenticate their account, text, email, and the Authenticator app. Set up the FSA IDs now before the FAFSA opens, because you won't be able to set up an FSA ID and use it to create a FAFSA in the same day. The one caveat there is for family members who don't have Social Security numbers. Because a Social Security number is tied to the FSA ID, there is a unique process for users or parents who don't have Social Security numbers, where they will be able to create their FSA ID and use it the same day. They will have their account verified through a TransUnion Credit Bureau process. We won't get into the details of that today either, but there is more information available at ncfafsahub.org. Even though FAFSA, the Direct Data Exchange, will allow parents to import their tax information directly from the IRS, families should still have their tax returns with them. And then if possible, if you're having a FAFSA event at your institution, work with your school leaders to make sure that the Wi-Fi is accessible to everyone that day and that the internet is up and running. Then we also want to use the Finish the FAFSA tool, which Kathy will talk about a little bit more, to make sure that students FAFSAs go from submitted to completed. And then think about who are some trusted leaders that you can involve in the process. So we know that based on our research that teachers and counselors and college advisors are some of the most highly trusted sources for financial aid. But think about who else is out there in your community, in your schools, that can help students help deliver messages and help deliver messages about financial aid, to students. So we do have some wonderful tools to help you all in this process. I've mentioned the North Carolina FAFSA Hub several times. It is a wonderful resource that is solely for practitioners, only for counselors, college access organizations, college advisors, to stay up to date on the most, or to stay abreast on the most up-to-date financial aid information this year. The FSA has presented a FAFSA demo on August 17th. And so look for that on the FSA's YouTube page. And then we haven't talked much about the Next NC Scholarship, but we will be launching a website soon to tell you all about the Next North Carolina Scholarship, Next NC Scholarship, excuse me. The biggest thing to know there is that if a student and family's adjusted gross income is $80,000 or less, then most of them will qualify for the Next NC Scholarship, which guarantees $5,000 in combined federal and state aid for students who are attending UNC system institutions, and $3,000 in combined federal and state aid to attend a community college here in North Carolina. So again, that's $80,000. Most students will qualify for that base guarantee of $5,000 at a UNC system institution or $3,000 at a community college. And I've referenced this several times, but on November 30th at 11 a.m., we are having a line-by-line FAFSA walkthrough specifically for counselors and college advisors. Students and families will have one later in January. This is just for y'all. A financial aid professional will be there to walk you through what to expect with the FAFSA when it's released in December. And so now I'm going to turn things over to Kathy, and she'll talk with us about finishing the FAFSA.
Hi, folks. Great to be back with you. Yes, for those of you who are not already familiar with Finish the FAFSA, we actually have two FAFSA tools to help you with your FAFSA completion efforts at your schools and in your community. The first is the FAFSA tracker that gets updated every week, and that is on the CFNC website. At the very top of the website, you'll see something that says FAFSA tools. Both tools you can link to through that tab. The FAFSA tracker will get updated once we start getting new data, which most likely will be about mid-January would be my guess. That tool will give you information on total submissions and completions of FAFSAs at your school and at your district level. By then, we should also have class counts as well. So we should be able to calculate the rate of completion unless you happen to be at a private school or an early college school. But everyone else should get it. With regards to Finish the FAFSA, that's for folks who work directly with high school seniors on FAFSA completion. That's part of our suite of pro tools that's on the CFNC website. That is restricted information because it does have student names and their FAFSA completion status. So you do actually have to request access. It's a report that you all can use to see at the student level if a student has not submitted, started, or submitted or completed a FAFSA. And I think if we go to the next slide, we'll see the actually, it's probably the steps. Jenny, can you advance the slide? Thank you. So
You're
it's
welcome.
3 steps. If you haven't already set up an account, you need to have a CFNC account that's tied to your work email. So your school, or if you're a college advising corps, with your college advising corps account, then you submit a request to get Pro Tools set up. And then once that's done, there's a separate request for Finish the FAFSA, and we can get you set up with Finish the FAFSA for the schools that you support. Next slide. Once you have access, if you sign into Pro Tools, you'll open, you'll know that a bunch of the reports on your left are accordion style. So if you click on college reports, it'll pop open. You'll see Finish the FAFSA is one of the reports you can see. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll see your school. If you support more than one school, that will be a short drop down of the schools that you support. So you can select the school that you want to look at. On this summary page, we're reminding you of some of the information you need to, this is protected information. We do have a signed data use agreement with your school district or your organization. And so you are required to protect that information. So we just want to remind you that of your responsibilities with that. On the next slide, or typically when you're on Finish the FAFSA, you'll scroll down. This is a new summary report that we have put together for you. So you'll be able to see it at the school level. If you're a district personnel, you'll be able to see a district summary as well, but you'll be able to see the total number of students that we have in your school records, the number who have submitted, completed, not submitted a FAFSA, and then if there's any errors like missing a student signature, a parent signature, or if it's been flagged for verification, you'll get a sense of in total what your school looks like. So you have a sense if there's a bunch of errors that need to be followed up on. The error code at the bottom of the screen gives you an indication of which type of error a number of your students are experiencing. On the next slide, we'll show you a little bit about the look and feel of the report. Student name, obviously we've whited those out because that's protected information, but normally you would see your list of students there, the current status, so either not submitted, submitted, or completed. And then you can see right on that main screen down to the student level, if they're missing a student or parent signature or whether it's been flagged for verification. We don't unfortunately have an example of the error code, but normally if there is an error code, you would see that in the error code column. When you hover over it, it'll pop up and let you know what the error is and the next steps the students need to take to remove that error. And then the last column is a request that one of you all made of us, so we added and made this available, is the date submitted column. And with I believe any of the columns, if you go to the top, you can click on it and it'll sort by that particular column. And so what's great about the date submitted column is if you click on the top of that, it'll show you which are the most recent FAFSA completions in your senior class. So if you're supporting a large senior class, you can see the ones who have submitted a FAFSA since the last time you logged on. You don't have to go hunting through the table to see who newly has submitted a FAFSA. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jenny.
Awesome. Thank you, Kathy. So I am really excited to talk to you all about FAFSA Day. Those of you who might have been around in North Carolina for a while, even if you weren't working directly with students, you may have heard of FAFSA Day. We didn't have it last year. It had turned to a virtual event through the years of the pandemic, but we're bringing it back in full strength this year. Well, excuse me, this FAFSA cycle. So FAFSA Day is an event where students can go to a participating institution, participating college or university on a set day and time. Again, this cycle is going to be January 27th from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And they can get one-on-one or small group help with their FAFSA, get that help from trained financial aid counselors who work at the university. So every county that is lit up in orange is a county that has at least one participating FAFSA Day event. So right now we have 51 participating institutions. Actually, we have 54, but a couple of them are doubling up. They're working together. So we have 51 separate events where a student can go on FAFSA Day between the hours of 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. To get help with their FAFSA. If you live in a county, that's green right now, and you have a strong relationship with the community college or the four-year college that's in York County and you don't see them here, nudge them, reach out to them and ask them if they would be willing to participate in FAFSA Day. Share their contact information with me. My email address will be at the end of the slides. So we are going to need your help in a couple of different ways. We're going to have we'll have a toolkit with some advertising that we will be sharing, and we would love for you and really need you all to share that information with your students when the time comes. So post it all over your school. If your school has like a college and career based Instagram, put it there too. Share all of the information about FAFSA Day. We'll be sending out some save the dates soon. We recognize this is like 2 months away and people got to get through like the end of the year, end of the semester, lack of motivation first. So we will share that far and wide when the time comes. And this event is for high school seniors and it's for adult learners as well. And then also, we ask that you all would volunteer at a FAFSA Day event. So the QR code on the screen would take you directly to a Google form that would allow you to indicate your interest in being a volunteer at your local FAFSA Day event. So if you're not comfortable with the FAFSA, but maybe you want to help check people in or help folks with parking, help with registration, maybe you just want to be a friendly face there where students might be in an unfamiliar place, please sign up to be a volunteer at your local FAFSA Day event. If you're looking for a college that is a confirmed host institution and they're not on the drop-down box, that just means that they don't need volunteers outside of the folks who work in their office. So consider volunteering at another event, one that's closest to you. We're looking forward to it. We're happy. We're very excited about FAFSA Day. And we want to make sure that it is the best that it can be for students and families. Again, this is for high school students and for adult learners. So are there any questions that we can answer for you all that haven't already been answered throughout the session?
Penny, we've been answering questions along the way, so
Yes.
so far we're in pretty good shape. But if
I
anyone
thought
has,
so.
thanks. If anyone has any additional questions, we'll keep the lines open for another couple of minutes.
And while we wait on that, we'll share our contact information with you all. So if you have any questions about the FAFSA tracker, which we didn't talk about today, but the FAFSA tracker allows you to see FAFSA completion rates for the state of North Carolina, for your district and for your school. You can reach out to me if you have questions about the CFNC scholarship portal. Also feel free to reach out to me. If you have finished the FAFSA and Pro Tools access questions, feel free to reach out to our colleague Neftali Cabrales.
Penny, Sarah's asking how soon in advance should folks fill out their FSA ID?
That's a great question. So I've been telling people it takes about 1 to 3 days for the Social Security Administration to verify that the information or to match the information on the FSA ID to the person who's submitting the request. And so I would say 3 days or so. We are encouraging folks now, though, if you are a legal resident of North Carolina and you have a valid Social Security number, go ahead and create FSA IDs now so that when the FAFSA opens, there's nothing to hinder you from going through with that process. For those families who do not, or parents who do not have a Social Security number, they will have to go through a TransUnion Credit Bureau process to have their identity verified. So they will, and this process for parents who don't have Social Security numbers, that will not open until the date that the FAFSA launches. So again, it'll launch by December 31st. We don't have an exact date by December 31st, but when it does, the FSA ID process for parents without a Social Security number will open then.
Next question, Karen's asking to confirm that parents use the same FSA ID. They use the same FSA ID as they used if they had other students, older students who have already been in college, but if it's a parent, if the parents aren't living together and they're not sharing a household and they each need their own FSA ID. I'm not saying that very clearly, but hopefully you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So if a set of parents, legal parents, are married and they live together, they file their taxes jointly, only one parent needs an FSA ID. And if they had an older child who submitted a FAFSA and they used an FSA ID for that child, then that parent can use the same FSA ID. They don't have to create a new one to help their younger child through the financial aid process.
Okay,
Asking
folks,
great questions.
Yeah, it's 2:00. We're going to respect your time here and stop recording, number one.